So today I have Brian Spiesman. Did I say your last name correctly there, Brian?
Close, Spiesman.
Spiesman. That's not close. That's a butcher job. I should probably ask that part of the record button. Brian Spiesman with the Kansas State University and is a ecologist. So, Brian, you want to explain what you do, who you are?
Sure. Yeah. I'm a assistant professor in the entomology department at Kansas State University, and I'm a sort of an ecologist by training, but I work mainly with bees and other insect pollinators to try to understand how things like habitat loss and climate change affect um, populations of important pollinators around the state, and uh, try to think about how things like uh, how yeah, it's mainly habitat loss and agriculture.
Just kind of the ecology
Uh,
in regards to just the web of insects and plants is kind of my understanding.
right, yeah. So
And
been working with pollinators mainly, but I have a backgrounds in other organisms.
well, and I ran across your information. I don't know if you do you know who Peter Berthelsen is?
I do not.
So Peter Berthelsen, so he runs oh boy, it's the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund. And he also has if he's listening to this, he's gonna be so mad at me if I forget his other business name. Um it's conservation something. Anyways, he had done a recent webinar and he had shown the link to the bee machine, which we'll get into later. And I just kind of went down this rabbit hole like, what is this thing? This is very cool. Who's doing it? Who's behind it? And your name popped up. And so I just sent you the cold tweet, I think it was. And you were gracious enough to accept my invitation to join me today. So I appreciate that. Um, but
Yeah, no problem.
and I guess maybe since I've mentioned, maybe we jump right into the bee machine. Oh, do you want to explain what the bee machine is?
Sure. Yeah. So when we're studying bees, one of the biggest challenges is identifying bees. So we have in the U.S. there's over 4,000 different species. Worldwide, there's 20,000 or more species. So a lot of them look really similar, and that's one of the sort of the bottlenecks of bee research is getting them all properly identified. So we need to know how many, not only how many bees are, or how many bees are in a location, but how many of each species, so we can track whether populations of certain species are increasing or decreasing. So identifying bees takes a lot of taxonomic training. We need to be able to differentiate very very minute differences between different species. So this usually involves pinning them, putting them under a microscope, and then looking for these different features. Uh, so that's, as an ecologist, we always have to work with taxonomists who then do the hard work of identifying all these bees. There's not a lot of taxonomists out there that are trained in specific groups. So there's some groups that are harder than others, and so we really rely on them to do a lot of this heavy lifting for us. Um, One way to sort of remove this bottleneck and get our research out there quicker so people can use it for conservation is to think about using artificial intelligence and machine learning to help us identify bees from photos. So there's been sort of a revolution over the last couple decades in artificial intelligence, and we're just starting to pick it up in the field of entomology and ecology. Um, and it's so far it's been really great. So the bee long story to get into what bee machine is, but bee machine is essentially using artificial intelligence to identify bee images, or identify bee species from images. And so we are starting with bumblebees. There's about 45 or so species of bumblebees in the US and Canada. And about 280 species worldwide. And so we're starting out, we've just sort of expanded Bee Machine to include about 100 different species worldwide. And so this includes most of the species in North and South America, Europe, and parts of Asia. And we take images from public data repositories like GBIF, which get a lot of their data from iNaturalist, which maybe more people are familiar with. So we take images from there, we train them using these AI algorithms, and we can use our train model and just put it on a website, and so people can upload an image and then get an identity of the bee back pretty quickly. So it's been a lot of fun to work on, and it's a lot more it's a lot more accurate than I initially thought it would be. So when I started working on this 2 or 3 years ago, I was a little skeptical that it would produce results that are accurate enough to to be useful, but it sort of exceeded my expectations, and now we're starting to really ramp up the project and expand it further.
So was there a reason that you guys chose bumblebees first? Or maybe just bumblebees?
Yeah, bumblebees, that's a good question. So we started with bumblebees just because that's where the data are. So iNaturalist,
in those two data sets that you were explaining earlier, is that what you mean?
Correct, yeah. So we need these algorithms require thousands and thousands of images per class or per species. So we need to throw a lot of images at the algorithm so that it can learn what a bee looks like in all kinds of different situations. So if you take a picture of a bee, it's for any given species, it's going to look a little bit different depending on the lighting conditions and the angle and the
well, and even with
context.
honeybees, I'm not sure if it's true with bumblebees, but honeybees, as they age, they lose some of their fuzziness, and there can be a drastic difference between one that was just emerged versus a typical forager, and then one on the end of its life that has almost no hair left, or that's probably not even hair, but the fuzziness of the bee itself.
Yeah, definitely. And bumblebees are they're the same in that regard. As they age, they look different, but and just like with honeybees, there's different groups within bumblebees. There's queens, workers, there's the males, and they can all look different, very different. And even within the worker groups, you might have, for a given species, you might have geographic variation in what they look like. So they may have a yellow stripe in one area and an orange stripe in a different area, and it just look completely different. Even within the same area, there's a lot of variation. So you need to throw thousands of images into the AI algorithm to so it can sort of cover all of these different angles, appearances, and things like that. And for that reason, that's kind of why we started with bumblebees, just because we have a lot of good image data on bumblebees, which we don't have for a lot of other species.
Well, and I just ran through, I don't know if you could see it, but I was sharing the screen on ultimately how you do it. And I just literally went on the internet. I was like, I'm just going to, because I actually tried to find one on my phone. I take pictures of my bees all the time, but sadly I didn't have a single bumblebee one, which I feel a little ashamed about. But I'm going to just try to find one that maybe could be a little tricky, where the head's buried and just its butt's hanging out. And it was, as you could see, it was like 99.999% certain it was that one species, which is incredible. And like you were kind of alluding to with the machine learning, it's like the more you do it, the more you expose it to more images, the more accurate it gets.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we need all those images, because we get a lot of images. Then bees are hard to photograph. They're not always the cover photo quality images. They're, they move fast, so they could be blurry, they could be, hidden by vegetation or flowers, things like that. So yeah, and that's the cool thing about these AI algorithms, is that um, they learn their own feature set, so we don't have to tell them to tell it what features to look for. We don't have to say, okay, so bumblebees or this species of bee has this little stripe here and has these kind of cells on their wings. We feed it images, and it learns its own set of features. And so
That's
therefore, if you
crazy.
get a bee that's kind of hidden, it and like a feature that we would rely on to identify it as hidden, it may not rely on that feature in that case, and it could look at something else. So that's kind of why it's been, exceeded my expectations, and it can identify these things with such high confidence.
Do you think it will eventually expand into like honeybees and hoverflies and the other pollinators?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's kind of the next step right now. Is we're going to still expand bumblebees, but we're going to also move into other kinds of bees. Honeybees is an easy one, because on these public data repositories, honeybees it's probably the single most common bee species photographed there. So there's plenty of images out there for honeybees, especially Apis melliferae. And so that's just kind of their waiting, and so that's kind of the next step. So I kind of feeling out, like, how do we start incorporating more bees? Like, do we do it sort of one species at a time, or do we do it at a group at a time, kind of like bumblebees as a group? Then do we do like a different group at a time? So we're just trying to figure out, like, what's the best way to to expand.
Well, it's a very cool tool, and I poked around on I think it was on the website, and it is the code and open source code, because I noticed that you displayed a lot of the code and kind of what it did, and I really didn't drill down on whether you were kind of explaining how the system operates, and I don't know if diverging is the right word, but diverges that information into categories. And so are you
Yeah,
working on an open source platform?
yeah, I'm working in Python, so using the Python programming language. But then within there, we're using uh, so far mainly TensorFlow, which is it's sort of a set of packages that you can use to utilize these models. And the models themselves, the AI model, the AI models themselves are open, and so you can go online and download the code or just download the model, and then sort of use your own data to sort of train or to retrain that model to do what you want to do.
Right. And
So
go ahead.
oh yeah, so in that sense it's open. I haven't published the sort of finished models openly yet, and we'll probably be doing that pretty soon. So just to let people be able to use these models. But the all of the data that I'm using is open source. All of the models that we're using are open source. We're just sort of reconfiguring them to do
Right.
to make
Well,
them.
and I've used like GitHub is a really popular, if not the largest, like database for open source code. And I always envision things as like modules, right? Like you can kind of pick and choose these modules of code and get them to communicate between one another, which is what's great with code, because it's almost like no one really needs to start from scratch. Because if you had to do that, it's like everything would take forever to build.
Now it's time to pay the bills, so I'm going to read you an ad. Today, this episode is brought to you by Kinnick Bees. It is your place to find live package and nukes for sale in the Midwest. They ship throughout primarily the entire United States. And their bees are a little bit different than the traditional package bees you get. They are mite resistance hybrid bees. The queens are bred off of queens from Latshaw apiaries, which is known for having queens that last productively into their 5th year and without any treatments. So if you need to order bees for 2023, you could order them now or simply reserve them for as low as $20. So check them out at kinneybees.com or visit directly to the Order Honeybees page at kinneybees.com/order-honey-bees.
And you possibly wouldn't be able to take advantage of pretty significant breakthroughs in code. So I've always found like the coding community is just this very open, welcoming community, which is, I mean, it's great because it helps, projects like this and even projects that I've been working on come to life because of that in a much more speedy, efficient way.
Yeah, it's great. This project wouldn't be possible without open data, open code, and so it's we're going to try to make sure that we get back. So we have one thing that we do is in order to sort of pre-process the images that eventually go into training the algorithm, is we have to take the full image and then crop out the bee, so that we're not training on the whole image, because oftentimes an image will be this big and a bee will be really small in there, so the algorithm will have a hard time saying, okay, this is an image of bx when there's so much going on. We have to really focus down. So in order to do that efficiently, we have to use these object detection algorithms, which locate the bee in the image and then automatically crop it out, and then we use those cropped images to actually train the model.
Oh, I wouldn't have thought of that.
Sorry,
I wouldn't have thought that would have been one of the processes, but it makes sense.
Yeah, because so the model that we use actually, when we train it and when we have an input image, kind of like you just showed, it actually shrinks the image down to about 300 by 300 pixels.
Here, I'll redo it here while you're talking. So for people that are able to watch, you on the front page of beemachine.ai, you can just in the first fold, there's an upload your image button. You can click that, and then I've just downloaded this one from the internet. So it looks like maybe that one's on what flower is that? That's what is that? A thistle of some sort? So it crops out. You're saying the computer program will crop out all around the wings, its head buried in the flower here, or try to do its best job, and then remove the flower out of the background and then identify that cropped image.
It won't sort of draw so tightly around it. It'll just make us like a bounding box around the edge of the bee.
So it would do something like that.
Right. So that is in order to sort of pre-process all of the images that we use to train the model. When you're actually kind of like you just did, when you're actually inputting an image, it's best to kind of like here on the front page, it's best to take your full image and then crop out right around the bee, and then that'll give you a much more accurate prediction of what the species is. Just because the algorithm isn't having to deal with all of those non-bee pixels, it can focus in on mainly bee pixels and tell you what the answer is. So the algorithm that we use to do this automated cropping to generate our training data, that is available we're using a platform called RoboFlow to do some of this stuff. And if people need a sort of a pre-trained algorithm to not crop out, but just to locate bumblebees in images, that's available right now on RoboFlow. And you could probably just go on the website and search my name or something like that, and be able to download not only the model to do that, but also the training data set too.
So is it a tool on RoboFlow, or it's the actual code?
It is, so RoboFlow has the code that I use to generate the model, but what's available from me is the finished model and the data set.
Got it.
On RoboFlow, they also provide all of the code that you would need to train your own model too.
Okay. Yeah, it's a very, very cool tool, and I'm excited to see what it does moving forward. I mean, well, not gonna. I could see it being an app where someone could just pull out their phone, take a picture in the field, and it tells you what it is. But I mean, I've used Google Lens for that, and sometimes you get good results, sometimes you don't. And I mainly use it for like flowers, and so I've never tried it with bees or anything, but.
Yeah, so it will be an app. So we have in about 2 weeks, we're getting ready to release our mobile app.
Oh, nice.
So you'll be able to download.
I did not know that information, so that was not a fed plug. That was all natural.
Yeah, so about 2 weeks we'll have our we've been working on it for the past year or so, and it's coming out. The release date is tentatively the week of September 26th.
Okay.
So I imagine it'll be out around October 1st, something like that.
Very cool. Well, congratulations.
Yeah, it's great. So the website is kind of basic and bare bones. You just you put in an image, you get back an ID. We don't save any of that information on the website, so we don't know. We don't know who's uploading images or what if people are finding it useful, things like that. The cool thing about the app is that it will tell you it will give you the identity of the bee that you're looking at, but it will also for the users, it will save the location so you can plot all of your sightings on a map.
Cool.
You can yeah, and that way, all of the information that users across the world will be using will all of their information related to bees and locations will be available for conservation
That's
science.
Great. So you'll be able to say this bee has been spotted in this area and start to kind of develop a global map of species and their locations.
Right. Yep.
That's awesome. Well, and so
yes.
No, go ahead.
No. We're really excited about it, and there's other apps and stuff that do kind of similar things, but this one is specific for right now it's specific for bumblebees. Eventually, it'll be other bees, but because we're focusing specifically on this group of bees, we can get much more accurate models than some of the other ones that focus on everything. Like there's an app called Seek by iNaturalist, and that's really great. And I use that a lot, and it's really good for plants and a lot of insects and birds. Anything that you or any sort of living thing that you can focus or photograph. It does pretty good. It doesn't do quite as good at the species level for a lot of bees, just because I don't know. Maybe it's because they're so broad in what they're able to do, because they're looking at plants and animals and all these things. So we're focusing just on bees, and so we can get a little bit more accurate than some of these other apps.
Very cool. And I mean, have you guys done any like surveys in regards to like using data from off of someone else's phone more broadly? I know, like, and the reason there's a couple reasons I'm asking that question. One is, in today's landscape, obviously people are becoming more sensitive to their data being used, right? But the other side of that coin is as I'm working on the idea and the functionality of the products that I'm working on, there's a bunch of sensors within the hive as well, and there's some added benefits that could be used if that data is collected discreetly, right? Like they're not identified to any one single person or potential data that could infringe on some sort of privacy. That is important, right? But collectively, it could provide a lot of added benefit to scientists, or anything of the like. And like like just as an example, like temperature, for instance, like if there's a temperature sensor on a hive, all of a sudden you've deployed 5,000 temperature sensors that are more local. Or one of the other things that we have is accelerometer. Well, if an earthquake took place, these accelerometers could technically pick up and help pinpoint the location of a earthquake. And those are just kind of some examples of how broadly deployed sensors kind of all come together, while omitting those privacy concerns, but yet, provide to the greater good.
Right. Yeah, I could imagine, I don't work a lot with honeybees, but I could imagine, you have all of the sensors on hives all over the place, and you could get maybe a better understanding of what are some of the causes of problems in your hive. If you see correlations between like I don't know, temperature and some response by the bee, then that provides a lot of good, and that's the kind of data we need. We don't just need these sort of one-off just observations. We need a lot of data to generate analyses that we can really rely on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you anymore. I mean, that was well said as well. So kind of moving a little bit past the bee machine. So I'd made a note here. I wrote it horribly. That you focused on the community of landscape and the broad interest on how environmental changes affects the diversity and function of the ecological communities. Like, what does that mean? I mean, there's a lot of words in there. And so I feel like because it is so broad, like, how do you stay focused on what you are researching in regards to the insect, animal, and its environment? And that'll lead into another thing in regards to like grasslands, but I'll just let you take that from there.
Yeah, so the kind of what you just read over there is I probably meant for other scientists. So and it'd be good to sort of remove a lot of the jargon so people can the general public can get a better understanding of what I do if they come to my research or my website. So community ecology is the study of how different species interact, and how these interactions with different species cause some populations to increase and some to decrease. Things like predators and prey, and how they interact, and how their dynamics, how their population dynamics can cause boom and busts and things. And there's some sort of practical applications of this. So, things like pest control in gardens or in agriculture in general, it's really, a lot of predator-prey interactions. So we want to see, what are the causes of increase in pest species? How do things like the broader landscape influence those increase in pest species? So, if we have an agricultural area, what happens if we put a natural area next to it that might harbor some native predators of pests that might then, move out into the ag field and reduce the amount of pests without having to spray as much.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, it would be, as just an example, would be as I may be able to use agricultural as an example, as I go and spray my field full of pesticides that eliminate a certain type of pest, how does that affect the ones that haven't been impacted by that insecticide, as an example? And then would the predators that would have originally preyed upon those animals that no longer exist, what does their diet change to?
Yeah, that's part of it. It's all, I mean, there's so much interconnectivity with with life. So you spray, you affect the pests in your crop field, that's going to have an effect, not just on your crop, but also in the surrounding areas. Yeah, so if you might have direct mortality of things that get sprayed, but then there's not going to be as much, there's non-target effects. So you might be, killing the pest species, which is important, but there may be other sort of beneficial species sort of mixed in there that are impacted. So, yeah. So, one of the things that my lab and some of my collaborators more specifically are looking at is, these having field strips. And so you have like strips of natural area that are next to like a crop. So like you sow in some grassland seeds or some like wildflower seeds next to a crop. That's going to provide habitat for bees, for these predators of pests. And then, so if you have more of these sort of natural area strips across the landscape, you're going to increase the habitat, the amount of habitat for these beneficial insects. And therefore, the idea is that it's going to sort of spread throughout not just these sort of strips of natural area, but actually into your crop to provide more pollination services or more pest control services, just because there's a greater abundance of these other resources out there that are going to have a sort of a spillover effect, a beneficial effect on the crops.
So one of the things, my mind's always wired honeybee, right? Like whenever I'm just wired honeybee. So my mind always goes there, and I always forget, well, always, but I should bring more insects into my mind when I'm thinking about habitat. However, there was someone had quoted you saying that you'd be examining how the harvesting regime within bioenergy grasslands affects pollinator communities. Grasslands are thought to have conservation value for pollinators, but this value can change based on how the grasslands are harvested in biofuel productions. And so my question was, or the question that rose to my mind when I read that was, I've always envisioned grasslands as not beneficial to pollinators. And so maybe guide me through like what that statement actually means.
Yeah, so that's some research that we were working on a few years ago. And the idea was that if we can take some of the marginal lands, the marginal agricultural lands that aren't that productive, and return them to native grasslands, which then you could harvest for biofuel. So you could either you could hay them, or you could harvest them. The idea back then was that we could harvest them to create bioenergy. So we could use grass as a source of bioenergy. And so in that case, you have the native grasslands, which are really really beneficial to not just pollinators, but a whole host of organisms that provide beneficial services to humankind. And the idea was that, okay, so you put all this out there, but then at the end of the season, or at some point within the season, you have to harvest it. And what's that going to do to all of those species that you hope are going to be out there? So the idea of that project was to just investigate what's the effect of this harvesting of native grasslands, the biomass, harvesting this biomass from native grasslands, and what's the effect on native pollinators.
I see. Okay, that makes much more sense. And
it turns out that the harvesting, at least with the way that we harvested, once at the end of the season, is beneficial. It has a lot of effects that are similar to fire in grasslands, which we need fire in grasslands to maintain them as grasslands. And so, over the millions of years, grasslands have sort of evolved with fire. And
when we continue to try to put them out, which to some degree, I understand why we're doing that, but like forest fires, like, and human safety, right? Like with that removed, I don't understand why we don't let more burn than do, because they do rejuvenate the forest. And a lot of times forest gets so mature, or grass gets so mature, that it prevents new growth, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's grassland. So I'm more familiar with the beneficial effects of fire in grasslands. And so with grasslands, yeah, you need that. You need to sort of clear off the old dead vegetation periodically, and that causes a flush of growth. A lot of the plants have evolved. They actually need that fire to for germination, to germinate new
Okay.
seeds.
Even in
And so,
grasslands.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, there's all kinds of sometimes it's just the smoke that is required for germination. Other times it's a whole mix of different causes, but fire is really important for maintaining grasslands. Otherwise it kind of reverts to sort of a shrubby foresty kind of habitat that loses a lot of the native vegetation that is really important to maintain a diverse ecosystem.
That makes sense. And so you've also done some land cover change research. And what is land cover change? Is that just changing something from like crops to grass, or grass to flowers?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So that's uh, part of my PhD work, and then moving out into some of my grassland work. So and for my PhD, I was working in Florida, where they have these pine forests called sand hills. They're sort of an upland pine system. They're more of like a savanna pine. They're sort of sparse pine trees intermixed with sort of like a grassland um, uh, habitat. And so those have become really rare in the southeast. From the Carolinas down through Florida. It's become a really rare habitat, and it's a very
Was it
diverse
pretty
habitat.
prominent in history that there was more of it?
Yeah. And so it's nice habitat, or it's nice for people. So we develop it a lot because it's sort of upland habitat in these sort of low areas, and so it's seen a lot of sort of urban development.
Oh, I see.
It's Yeah, so the idea there is that we're trying to understand how so you have a patch of this pine habitat, this pine savanna habitat. You want to know how do the surrounding areas affect what's going on inside that patch of habitat. So this is one of the sort of the themes of ecology these days, is trying to understand how these sort of spatial effects can impact what you see locally. So if you have a bunch of pine habitat and it's surrounded by more pine habitat, you're going to have more movement of the native animals that rely on that kind of habitat, and they're going to have like a greater area to survive. If you have a relatively small patch, even though it might be a high quality patch, if it's surrounded by houses and ag fields and other sort of non-pine habitat, then that's going to make it difficult for the things to live locally, because if something goes extinct locally, then there's no source for recolonization, that kind of stuff. So
Right.
land cover change is kind of the study of that. So how does the changing land cover, that the changing types of habitats around over the landscape, how does that affect what we're seeing in any particular area?
Right. And I share a bit of a fear, as it appears man continue, and it's right, we got to feed ourselves, but I think we need to find a better way. But and live, right? It seems that there's almost no corner of the earth that we don't affect anymore that hasn't been set aside. And yeah, I'm not, I'm my middle-aged, but I remember as a kid always like seeing fireflies, and we'd go out at night, we'd catch them. And where I live, um, we see quite a few of them, but we've made an intentional move on converting 60 acres to something natural again, and restored some of the landscape. But anything outside of our the place that we live, we still don't see them, and it's because, well, it's not because, I'm assuming it's because of ag. Everything around us is ag, and the ditches are mowed. There's no real habitat and or food, or a living system, I guess, whether that's, what they breed in, eat, live in, hibernate in. It appears that that's gone. And I'm by no means a firefly expert, but it's complicated. And I would imagine as an ecologist, you've got to be just banging your head against the wall sometimes going, can't we just do a little bit everywhere and do it really, really good?
Yeah, that's kind of what you're right. We have to feed ourselves. Farmers need to make a living, and so, there's more and more of us. So there's more people, more mouths to feed. So we definitely need to keep up with agricultural production. But like you said, there may be a better way to do it. So one of the things that we're starting to look at is, like I mentioned before, these sort of ag strips that we can plant native wildflowers, native habitat, whatever specific to the region, and that it's going to differ based on where you are in the U.S. or around the world. But in these sort of crop margins, roadsides, things like that, we can add back value to these areas by planting native vegetation. And it doesn't take a lot. It's
Right.
You add a few flowers and the bees come. And so it's this kind of habitat. If we can sort of increase it over the landscape by utilizing these areas that we typically mow and keep nice and tidy, if we can sort of rewild them a little bit, then that's going to help everybody, I think.
Right. And in the podcast that I had two of them with Peter Berthelsen, who I mentioned earlier to you, who you probably should connect with, honestly. Like, we've talked about the challenges of, why does the DNRs of the world choose to plant just grass in these DNR areas versus a native pollinator mix? And it makes some sense, right? Like, one of them is instant results and it's cheap and by that means, I mean, grass. The other one takes 3 years of management to get it back up and develop a root system where that product can thrive. But to your point, like, if we just simply said, we're going to take highways and we're not going to mow them anymore, we're going to just throw flowers in there or whatever positive habitat plantings we can do in there, that would make a huge impact. I mean, you just think of just how much land that of itself represents. It's just, are we willing to commit to instead of just sprinkling down some grass, which now you see them just rolling sheets of hay with grass in them on the side of the highway? Are we going to try to figure out a way and establish a priority financially in doing what I think is the right thing and probably better for our insect ecology, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
But we are rolling into our hard stop. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention or direct any of the listeners to any of your resources?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say if you're interested in bumblebees, check out Bee Machine at beemachine.ai. Make sure to crop your images before you put them in there. We're developing a way to that the algorithm will do that for you ahead of time. So that's coming soon. But then that's should be in one of our updates on the app. But the app is coming out. The mobile app is coming out in about 2 weeks. So it should be available around the 1st of October of this year. So
and
check
that'll
that
be
out.
Google Play and iOS.
Yep, available on both Android and iOS. And check it out. And I'm hoping to, it's sort of the end of the season, but some of the queens will still be flying and depending on where you are in the US, but hopefully we can get some users. And you can always go back, if you have photos stored on your phone, you can always go back and upload the photos that you have stored on your phone to generate some observations from the previous summer. And then by next spring, we should have some, even more updates to the app, and it should be, really ramped up and ready to go for the pollinator season next year in the northern hemisphere.
Very cool. And then do you have a Twitter account or anything you want people to follow you if they'd like to?
Sure. Yeah. Let's see. It's what is it?
It's just at Brian. At Brian. I don't want to butcher your last name again. Spiesman, right?
Spiesman, yeah.
Brian Spiesman. So it's BrianSpiesman. And I'll have that link below in the show notes.
There's also the Bee Machine group also has a Twitter account, Bee Machine AI, or at Bee Machine AI. So that's there too. So yeah, and you can use that I'll be posting updates on both accounts there, and I should probably start a Facebook page too, but
just more stuff
next
to
on
do.
the list.
Well, then you need a LinkedIn profile you need an Instagram. Yeah. I mean, the list just keeps going. You could be doing right. You could be doing TikToks.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Brian, I really appreciate the time. I'm glad we were able to connect. And really look forward to seeing what the Bee Machine kind of evolves into. I'm excited about it. I think it's really cool as it is even. So the fact that you could scan bees and potentially other things in the future is super cool. So good work.
I'm excited too.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
There was nothing left to say. How to get up, walk away, know when to hold them, know when to fold, know when to hold them, know when to fold.